A very good afternoon to all the students of class 11. Today I'm going to take up the poem Childhood, written by Marcus Nathan. Marcus was born on 23rd of June 1975 and is an Australian writer of German origin. He's best known for The Book Thief and The Messenger, and these two novels became international bestsellers. So in this poem, Childhood, the writer begins on a questioning note. So we can say the curiosity to find out more, because as he has grown, he wants to know where his childhood has gone. When did it go? And when did it go? And finally, in the end, where did it go? So it's out of curiosity that he wants to know. He wants to analyze the different stages or the phases of life that he went through, and at exactly which point did he lose his childhood. So there are various guesses that he's made and various theories that he's given about the time when he must have lost his childhood. So we gradually take up the poem, and I'll read it line by line and explain it side by side. So as I told you, the poem brings about a contrast between the periods of childhood and adulthood. And childhood, which stands for innocence, simplicity, and dependence, immaturity, truthfulness, purity. So all these great attributes and all the noble attributes, noble virtues, they are linked with childhood. Because when a childhood is supposed to be the best phase of life and in its simplest and purest form. Because as a child grows up and turns into an adult, he also acquires all the other habits which the adults have slowly, and gradually he also mingles with the world of adults. So we all go through these phases. So let us see line by line what the poet has to say. Okay. When did my childhood go? When? The question, it begins on when did my childhood go? Was it the day I ceased to be 11? So the poet is saying that was it at that time when I completed the age of 11? Ceased means stopped. When I stopped, or when I had completed the age of 11. Was it the time I realized that hell and heaven could not be found in geography, and therefore could not be? Was that the day? So here the poet is trying to tell us that. Now here I would just like to bring about a little reference that people abroad or in the States and all, they believe that because the poet has specifically taken the age of 11, could have taken 10, could have taken 12, because they believe that at the age of 11, you come into that preteen age. And this preteen age is, considered to be under 12, especially when you've completed 11. So they believe that way, because the girls and the boys begin to call themselves big girls and big boys, though they behave or they talk or they, project things that little ones do. But I mean, that little slight transformation towards the grown-up side comes into them. So probably that is why he has taken the age 11. Because in the States and all, they believe in this preteen or pre-teenager age. And he's termed as a preteen or pre-teenager under 12. And they say age 11 is the old age of childhood. The completion level. So age 11 is the old age of childhood. That's why probably the poet has taken this age into account. Okay. Was it the time I came to know that hell and heaven, that these are not places or locations to be found on the map or on the globe, and in geography there is no mention of these places at all. That hell and heaven could not be found in geography and therefore could not be. That means they do not exist. So this is the time he realizes. Now here I would like to give a reference about hell and heaven. Hell and heaven, in childhood, how spiritual and religious training is given, kind of, to put the children onto the path of religion and spirituality, and to teach them good deeds. Children are always taught, that you must do good deeds. When you do good deeds, you go to heaven. Heaven is a blissful state. And when you sin, or when you commit wrong deeds or evil deeds, then you don't get a place in heaven and you are sent to hell. Now, these are not places actually, but that was a way of telling children to remain on the path of virtue, to remain on the path of goodness, and not to commit any kind of mistakes or sins. So hell and heaven, basically, you can say heaven is when you're happy, you're joyful, there's smooth sailing, everything is fine, good. That is heaven. And hell is when you're sad, when you're depressed and sorrowful about something. There's dejection, there's failure, and despair, loss of hope. So these are actually the state of your mind, how you want to feel. So there are no exact places on this earth called hell and heaven. Like little children, I read a little article the other day, and this was on the Sadhguru channel, and when the the priest was preaching, and there were little children sitting over there, and he's preaching, and they're talking something about hell and heaven. So the preacher asked, when do you go to heaven? So the child says, when I help the poor, when I smile, I don't complain. So various children had various things to say. So that was basically, children were nurtured on that aspect of hell and heaven. Even today, when we say paap and punya, that we talk about कि पाप नहीं करने, पुण्य ही करते रहो, only then स्वर्ग में जगह मिलेगी, नहीं तो नरक में होगे. But actually, in our Hindu mythology, they also believe that swarg and nark, everything is on this earth. If you're leading a good life, comfortable life, that is equal to heaven. And when you are leading a very miserable life, when you are not, you don't get the right things in hygiene, sanitation, you're living in hovels and dirty conditions, so that is equivalent to hell. That's what people generally think. Okay. All right. So was it the day I realized that hell and heaven could not be found in geography? So great, awareness has come about, and that hell and heaven do not exist at all. They are not geographical boundaries. Okay. Now here we see that the realization and the analyzation. So here we see that the child is beginning to get those rationalism, or that rational thought, that because they are not on the globe, so he's trying to rationalize that these places don't seem to exist at all. Was that the day? So maybe when I realized this, when that rational thought began to came to me, or when I stopped, when I had completed the age of 11 and realized that hell and heaven are no places at all. Next answer. When did my childhood go? Now again we see the first line is again repeated here. When did my childhood go? And all the stanzas begin on the same question note, and each stanza ends also on the same line. Was that the day? So kind of a repetition. So we will say it is a refrain. It is a refrain. In the junior classes, you must have done a poem, The Brook, So after every stanza, there was a line, for men may come and men may go, but I go on forever. So that was also a refrain to add music, emphasis, and rhythm to the poem. So here also to lay emphasis that he's still not found the answer, So again, when did my childhood go? Was it the time I realized that adults were not all they seemed to be? They talked of love and preached of love, but did not act so lovingly. So over here, as the child is growing, as the poet is growing, and he realizes that adults, they preach a lot, but they do not practice it themselves. So it's highly ironic that they are preaching, but they are not practicing the same thing. So this tends to be hypocritical in nature, that they're hypocrites. They talk about something, but they don't do that thing. And in fact, they act contrary to it. So that is why it is ironic. So the poet, as he grows and he sees this aspect in adults about hypocrisy and not practicing what they're preaching, so the trust and faith that he had in the adults, it begins to wane, and when he begins to lose that trust and faith in adults, so was it that time when he realized that adults are not what they are? They seem to be dual in nature. They say something and they do something else. Whereas children are not like that. Children, whatever they have to say, they say it very openly. And because they're in their pure form, simple form, they don't know these prejudices and biases, and they don't know, to take sides like that. So children are innocent and they're not discriminatory. So adults, in that matter, are hypocrites. They say something and they do something. And that is why the poet says, was that the time when I realized that what adults are, and he lost that faith and trust in them? Was that the day when he lost his childhood? Then we come on to the third one. When did my childhood go? Again, the same question is repeated. Now he's looking for another reference. That could it be this one? Was it when I found my mind was really mine, to use whichever way I choose, producing thoughts that were not those of other people, but my own and mine alone? Was that the day? Now here the poet, once again, he's still continuing to ponder over the same issue. When did my childhood go? So he continues to ponder, think about it. And here he comes around with a different aspect. That was that childhood lost when I matured and I began to have my own individuality. Excuse me. To have my own individuality, to have a mind of my own, to be able to think independently and not have thoughts and directions being imposed by others. Where there's no bias, no prejudice, no notions, those thoughts are completely mine. They have originated from my mind. I've not taken them from anywhere. Nobody has imposed them on me. But when I begin to think, so that in this stanza, we talk about individuality being a part of growing up. When you mature slowly and you can take decisions on your own, when you don't have to depend on others, when you become self-dependent, you can weigh the pros and cons, you can see what's good for you and what's not so good for you. So when you begin to make or take decisions, so the poet is saying, do you think that was the time when I lost my childhood? Now, when you're talking about individuality, this individuality also comes with lots of experiences, which are learning experiences. And that's what makes you mature. Was that the day? Again, we have the refrain, as I told you. Now, after these three stanzas, we come on to the fourth stanza, which says, where did my childhood go? Now, from when, we are coming down to where. When he's given us various, different aspects. That when I turned 11, or when I realized that hell and heaven are not actually places on this earth, or when I realized that adults were not what they were, in fact, they're hypocrites, or when I gained individuality and I matured enough to take my own decisions. So those are the aspects of when. Now he says, where did my childhood go? Then, now here we see that finally he seems to come to some conclusion, because he's been skeptical, he's been asking these questions and guessing various ways in which he could realize when did his childhood finally leave him. So we come to the end over here where he says, it went to some forgotten place, a place which is forgotten, that's hidden in an infant's face, that's all I know. So ultimately he comes to the conclusion that an infant's face, a little small child's face, this childhood goes there. Why? Because childhood is a picture of complete simplicity, innocence, and purity, which is very, very far different from the adults. So finally, he does say Then the second line says it went to some forgotten place. This refers to that there is a child in all of us. The child in us never dies, no matter how old we grow. So, but it goes to some forgotten place where we let the child just live in that dormant stage. So that is why when we see old people dancing, singing, enjoying themselves, then immediately the thought comes to our mind, the child in them is still alive, So that is a statement and which we usually make when we see elderly people enjoying themselves just like children do, without any inhibitions, without any shyness, and they're enjoying themselves and they're indulging in all those kind of activities that children indulge. So that's another connotation, that the child in us never dies. It's always there, and it comes alive when it gets the right stimulus and the right environment. Okay. But finally, what is the answer that we get? That childhood, it resides in an infant's face. Okay? So all infants, it includes all infants. So childhood is basically a symbol, or the infant is a symbol of childhood, because it has purity, simplicity, truthfulness, and lots of all the good virtues that are there. Simplicity, all that is there in a child. Now, these two last lines are a little paradoxical. Paradoxical means contrary, because we think that childhood is lost, but it is not lost. You can still see it in an infant's face, so that it is alive. It is very much there, even though it's an irreversible process, that we cannot go back into childhood again once we become adults. But the cycle continues, because in every infant you can see childhood, which is very much prominent there. Okay, so that is what the poem talks about. So the first stanza talks about rationalism. When you begin to rationalize, when you begin to analyze, think for yourself why this is like that, why, when you begin to question yourself and you begin to rationalize. So here, rationalize was when you guess that hell and heaven are not places to be found on this earth. They're nowhere in geography, they're nowhere on the globe. So that means they do not exist at all. So when you begin to rationalize things, analyze things. So that was there in the first stanza. The second stanza talks about adults and their behavior, that whatever they preached, they never practiced. So it was only merely words being said, but not being practiced actually. They spoke about love and they spoke about various other things, but they did not actually preach and carry on whatever they said, So that is the time. And adults, the world of adults is actually like the childhood is a period of beauty, it's beautiful, innocence, purity, simplicity, and adulthood is full of, what we can say, physically we may grow, there may be, of course there are positive sides, physically we grow, intellectually we grow, we mature, but then there are other negative aspects that come into an adult's world, like there's jealousy, there's hatred, there's prejudice, there's bias, there's treachery, and there's violence. There are so many things negative that enter an adult's world. Okay, so okay, now we go on to the figures of speech that we have. Okay, the literary devices or the figures of speech, as we say. Before that, let's see the rhyme pattern of the poem. Now, in the first line, we have go. So the rhyme pattern is A, B, B, C, C, and D. There's nothing to rhyme with A. So A is individual only because there's nothing to rhyme with go. So A and B, 11 and heaven are rhyming, so it's BB. Then geography and B are rhyming, so it's CC. D again doesn't have another complementary rhyming word, so it is D in itself. So the rhyme pattern is A, B, B, C, C, D. So over here we can say, I was going on to the figures of speech. Okay, so the first figure of speech that I told you was refrain, and refrain is, when did my childhood go? Was that the day? Because these two lines are in all the 3 stanzas. So that is refrain. Then we have alliteration. Alliteration, come on to the 3rd stanza, my mind, M and M. My mind. Then come on to whichever way, that is also the next line only, in the 3rd stanza, the 3rd line, whichever, W and W, whichever way. Then you come on to, the last one is the time. The time in 2nd stanza, 2nd line, the time. So those are the figures of speech we have. So refrain, then we have that refrain, those 2 lines which are repeated again and again. And then we have alliteration, my mind, whichever way, that day, and the time. Okay. Now we come on to why do you think the poet has written this poem? He has written this, and what is the mood of the poet? Very sad and nostalgic. Okay, he remembers his childhood, so he's nostalgic about it, and he's sad about this loss which is irrevocable. And he laments that loss. He laments that loss because that was the most beautiful phase in his life, in everybody's life actually, childhood. So he wants to find out more and more about it, that where did it go, and when did it actually go. So it is his curiosity because of his nostalgic, and he's trying to lament, and he wants to know more about this childhood. That is why he makes these, he's asking those questions to himself, and this is a process of self-discovery. Okay, it's a process of self-discovery. All right. Now I would like to tell you, okay, the theme. Yes, we go on to the theme of the poem now. The theme deals with the idea that as one grows up, one loses one's purity and simplicity and innocence. Innocence, purity, and simplicity. As you grow, you have a lot of physical prowess, that you're strong, and, you can do a lot of thinking and a lot of working on the physical end. But, and then you get new thoughts on your psychological end also, on the psychic plane, you mature. But the loss of childhood is enormous. It's a very, very big loss, and it is a permanent loss. And why is it a permanent loss? Because once you attain adulthood, you don't remain the same. Then you get on to various other traits like being vicious, being jealous, being corrupt, being unkind, being violent, and not practicing what you're preaching. So the adults are a total contrast to what children are or what childhood is. Because childhood is all about innocence, truthfulness, simplicity, and purity. And children do not know the corrupt ways of life. Like in a park, if you see small children playing, there'll be children, all small children come together, irrespective of the fact that they belong to different strata of society. So children easily mingle. They don't see, that high born, low born, or rich or poor. They all mingle together. That is their innocence. It's only the adults who begin to corrupt their minds later on and say, you cannot play with so-and-so because so-and-so is from this kind of a background or that kind of a background. So children are very, very innocent. And it's only the adults who feed the children with this kind of, vicious things or whatever it is. And ironically or paradoxically, the same childhood, the same person who has enjoyed that childhood, once when they come into the world of adults, they also become like adults themselves. Okay. I would like to do a few questions with you. Okay. How does the poet take the loss of his childhood? So the poet is very sad and nostalgic about the loss of his childhood because he realizes that he has lost great qualities of simplicity, innocence, truthfulness, and purity. And he feels that this loss is a great loss, a very, very heavy loss, because it's only in childhood that one has all these good qualities and, one trusts others and does not find faults with others, So they're very, very simple. When does the poet feel that he became adult and mature? The poet felt that it was perhaps at the age of, when he completed the age of 11, that he attained adulthood, and it was at that time that he could, differentiate fact from fiction, okay? And when he came to know that hell and heaven are imaginary things and they do not exist in reality, they're just concepts. Okay, next question, please. What is the attitude of the poet towards the adults? The poet does not think very highly of the adults because he finds them to be hypocrites. Why? Because they pretend to do what they are not in. They pretend to do things that are, they don't want to do in reality, and they are hypocrites. They preach a lot, but they don't practice it. And they are contrary to their speech, their actions, and whatever they say, they do not coincide. They do not complement each other. They talk of and preach love, but actually they do not put love to real use. You can see there's so much of bickering in families also among adults. If you see, they can't see eye to eye and their daggers drawn and things like that. So, we all know that we should live in unity, we should be united, we should be sacrificing, we should be, looking after each other's needs, we should be adjusting. But then all those things, they sound very good when they're spoken, but people do not actually practice and try to implement that in their lives. So that is why there's so much of chaos today, and there's so much of disparity, and there's so much of, ill will amongst members of the family also. This is why, because the adults, they just preach, but they don't practice it. That is why so many times it's said that, when parents are having a little argument or a little debate about something, they should not do it in front of children. Why? Because the children also pick up the same wrong things. And so many times now children don't have any kind of egos or those kind of things which adults have. So it's better to be role models for them in reality, in front of them, actually, to be role models. Today it's very important because it's easy to blame. Today the whole world talks about, the children have gone astray, it's very difficult to manage them, it's very difficult, they're on the wrong path, they're on the wrong track. But then somewhere we adults are responsible for it. Somewhere we are, and in this rat race or this herd mentality for earning money, and there's no time for children or things like that. So things begin to go a little haywire. So that is why it is high time. Sometimes, you must have heard the proverb that the child is the father of man. Child is the father of man. And this proverb was by Wordsworth, and he once actually said it, that the child is the father of the man, and it became a proverb. Because sometimes we can learn so much from children also. Child can be the father of man. It's not always that adults have to be right always and children have to be wrong. No, it's not like that. Sometimes children can also set a very big example, a great example for the adults. So, there are various connotations to it all. Okay. All right. Next question, please. What kind of independence is the poet talking about? The poet here is talking about the independence of thought and expression. Your thoughts and what you express. He has his own thoughts now. They're not borrowed thoughts or they're not imposed thoughts. He can rationalize, he can analyze, and he can think for himself without any prejudice, without any bias, He can think for himself. Okay. What differentiates childhood from adulthood? Here the poet says that what he thinks separates them is the independence of thoughts differentiates childhood from adulthood. Children are not independent. Children are dependent on their parents, so they are insecure, they are, immature. So all the time they need the support of the adults. But once the child gains maturity and begins to grow out of his childhood, he begins to think for himself. He begins to have the individual power of thought and expression. And in childhood, like whatever you tell the child will believe that, because the child has implicit faith in the parents and is dependent, to the effect, like so many times at home, we say that, when we are fighting among siblings and say, oh, we brought you from that, the basket of oranges in the bazaar. And the child almost begins to believe in that. But that shows the simplicity and purity and innocence of a child, So once the child begins to grow and attains adulthood, he knows right from wrong and he knows how to go about the worldly ways. Why? Because of the reasoning. Reasoning dawns on him. Rationalism dawns on him. Reasoning dawns upon that person and makes him mature and independent. Okay. Now here in this poem, the 3 stanzas, we begin with when, and the last one starts with where. So that is place, and when is the time. So this is a very important question. Is there any development of thought in the poem? Yes, there is a development, a well-planned development of thought in this poem. Why? It is a journey from when to where. The first 3 stanzas are directed towards time. When was it? When I was 11, or when I did this, or the time that I realized this, or the time that happened. Okay. So the first 3 stanzas are directed towards time, but the last stanza is directed towards place. And where did it go? So the poet in the last stanza comes to embrace the reality, or face the reality, accept the reality that his childhood lies in the innocent face of an infant. So the childhood remains alive forever because it's a cyclic process, and a part of growing up, that the stages that are there, you have infancy, and then children begin to grow and then mature and then become adults. Okay, so childhood actually lies in the face of an infant. All right. I hope I've been able to express myself, and I hope the question answers also will benefit you. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you. And if you do like the video, don't forget to press the like button, please. Thank you so much, children. God bless you.